Representative Bennett. John, you have 8 minutes and 8 seconds debating against the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Will Rogers said the difference between death and taxes is death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. In dealing with the budget issues we're facing in our state today and everyone scrambling around to figure out how to fix it, we need to look to other countries or even a territory of the United States, I don't know, maybe Puerto Rico, and learn from their failed policies. Puerto Rico today is in crisis. They have a failing economy and not much good news is in sight. If we, this body, make the same mistakes as Puerto Rico did, or the other countries that have done all they could to tax their way out of a recession, we are going to fail. So how did it get this bad? Well, we had the oil bust. By the way, it's still hovering around $40-something. And you add in the secondary tax base that was dried up because of the families working in the oil fields who lost their jobs, who stopped eating out, buying houses, buying cars, retail shopping and spending money, and so many other areas that add to the decrease in our tax revenue. Plus, out-of-control spending and tax credit with no return, it has hit us hard. Raising taxes on these struggling families to fill this hole will have the same effect on these families as the devastation of losing their jobs in the first place. When you raise taxes on citizens and companies, it will make them contract. The revenue will reflect this if taxes are raised. You cannot tax your way out of a recession, period. Why don't we send this tax increase to a vote of the people? Let's let them decide. They voted against a tax increase this past election in 2016. So why are we voting to raise taxes today? I think we also know that when you increase a tax on the industry, they just pass it on to the consumer. So why are we raising taxes? So taking what I just said into consideration, what else has contributed to our fiscal crisis? The government is overspending and the state agencies only want more. Since 2010, we have increased spending by $1.2 billion. Oklahoma has given more and more to state agencies instead of being responsible and requiring real accountability. Most American states are required to craft balanced budgets every year. This includes Oklahoma, and this is a great thing. However, balancing the budget and the revenue shortfall doesn't mean we keep funding government at higher levels just because they demand it, or at the same levels when we don't have it. What it means is we should be fiscally responsible and fund core functions of government: education, public safety, health care, and transportation at appropriate levels, and cut out the fat out of state government. We should call it cut and protect. Cut the waste out of the agencies and protect our core functions and most vulnerable citizens that receive help from these agencies. You're going to hear this. We've cut agencies to the bone. Where else can they cut? Well, let me give you some recommendations. I'm so glad you asked. There's a list longer than the few minutes allowed that I have to debate, but I will give you a few examples. Did you know that the state agencies have spent an enormous amount of money on advertising, membership, sponsorships, and project art to the tune of $39 million? Here's another one for you. How about the Department of Tourism? The same state agency who has been saying they will have to close down state parks if they take a cut. This is the same state agency that recently spent $20 million to build a state-run luxury hotel. Did you know that state agencies receive sales tax exemptions on all their purchases to the tune of $95 million a year? Did you know that the Chancellor of Higher Education makes $400,000 a year? And while we're talking about higher ed, let's look at some other waste. Did you know that UCO donated $10,000 to an international gender and sexuality conference it hosted last semester? OU hosts a conference on how to promote reproductive justice in red states. Oh, by the way, that's a code word for abortion rights. OU paid $150,000 to bring hip-hop artists to Norman for homecoming, and they recently spent $12,800 for a bias hotline. OU paid $20 million for a monastery that's not even in the United States. And student fees at UCO pay for Glamazon, which is a drag show. OSU posted a hiring for a full-time rock climbing coordinator, master's degree preferred. They're using therapy dogs at OU for students to de-stress during finals week. Seriously? We got men and women overseas exchanging rounds with the enemy, and they want to bring dogs in because our students are stressed out over testing. Seriously, we need to cut waste out of government. There's just so much more, but I don't have time or space to list them all today. So instead of talking about raising taxes on lower and middle income earners in Oklahoma, we need to be cutting waste in state agencies. Cut and protect is what we should do. Cut the waste and protect the vulnerable. So you asked another great question. What do you mean protect the vulnerable? Well, the first thing that happens when the legislature tells the state agencies to cut, you know what they do? They immediately cut their services for the elderly, the disabled, the poor, children, and the programs that our constituents need and depend on the most. Then they blame the legislature for doing that. In the case of one state agency, they tell everyone that we're going to shut down the state parks, even though they just spent $20 million on a state-run luxury hotel. I don't know. Maybe they could have used that money to keep the other parks open. Just a thought. These tactics are disingenuous at best and extortion at worst. To play our own citizens against us by telling them the sky is falling, to pressure us to not cut these agencies so the agencies can keep wasting their taxpayer dollar. You know how it's supposed to work? We, this legislature, we answer to the citizens. The state agencies report to us for money, and we in turn make sure the agencies are being good stewards of our citizens' tax dollars. The tail is currently wagging the dog. It's the legislature's responsibility to hold the agencies accountable, and by raising taxes instead of holding agencies accountable is a failure of our responsibility. We need to stop feeding the monster. Given the economy of the budget gap, why would anyone object to cutting government waste and protecting our core functions of government? I would encourage you to go Google and do some research, because history and economics have demonstrated that raising taxes is not an effective pro-growth solution. There is no evidence whatsoever that tax increases will actually solve our troubles. On the contrary, years of data from around the world show that when nations try to solve a fiscal crisis primarily by raising taxes, they fail. Apparently, our own governor doesn't even agree with herself. She's pushing for higher taxes. But in 2010, on July 25, 2010, she was asked, if the state faces a budget deficit, how would you make up the shortfall? You know how she replied, and I quote, "When it comes to government spending, the most important thing our leaders can do is to eliminate wasteful spending and make government more efficient, more effective, and less costly." Unquote. Thank you, Captain Obvious. I agree, we need to do this. The raising taxes approach will put Oklahoma in the loser category. The citizens lose, and we lose. You know, Winston Churchill said it best when he said this: "For a nation to try and tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket trying to lift himself up by the handle." We don't want to do the responsible thing like we do in our own homes in the government, do we? We demand that Oklahomans live within their means, our citizens. Why can't government live within its means? I don't know, maybe because it's somebody else's money. Do just like our Oklahoma families do. Don't put the tax burden on them. Live within our means. Let's cut waste out of government, protect our vulnerable, and do what they sent us up here to do. And if you're the one that votes to raise taxes, I'm sure your constituents will be happy to talk to you before the next election cycle. Vote no on raising taxes on our families in Oklahoma, and let's do what we're supposed to do: cut the waste and protect our most vulnerable.